Hey there nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and we're back with another episode of Cheap Shots, the series dedicated to showing you how to save money on the wargaming hobby. And on today's episode, we will show you how to quickly and cheaply paint up the Elucidian Starstriders for your games of Warhammer 40,000 Kill Team. By following the tips, techniques, and materials that we suggest, you can paint your miniatures to a beautiful tabletop standard for less than $30. And when you compare that for materials that you need to purchase from Army Painter as well as Citadel, we will help you save over $197. So you guys see right here, this is the end result for your miniatures. We have a beautiful tabletop standard as well. These guys are going to look absolutely fantastic in your games of Warhammer 40,000 Kill Team. For me, I'll be personally using these miniatures for Necromunda, but you could definitely use them for whatever they were intended for. So that being said, let's go and talk about how to paint these guys up quickly and cheaply. So the very first thing you need to do, of course, is to assemble your miniatures, which should be going by really quickly because these are all purpose-built individual miniatures. These are from the Rogue Trader expansion from Kill Team a couple of years ago. Games Workshop brought them back for the current re-edition of Kill Team as well. They are absolutely beautiful models with these beautiful Baroque designs on them as well, and very indicative of what a Rogue Trader entourage would actually look like as well. So once you have your miniatures fully assembled, the next thing we need to do now, of course, is to put a texturing on the bases. So for my texturing, I like to use sand from my garden that's in my backyard. All I do is I just take some wood glue, paint it all over the entirety of the base that I want to have texturing on, and I dust it with some sand from my garden. After I let that dry, what I do is I create a slurry, which is a 50-50 mixture of wood glue and water, and I apply it like a wash all over the texturing on the bases, so that way when it dries, it basically creates an airtight seal to make sure that the texturing doesn't flake off the bases. And once we're done with that, the next thing to do now is start putting on a primer and base coats. So the first thing we need to do, of course, is apply a primer. I like to use Rust-Oleum Flat White Primer. I get this in my local Walmart for $3.99, and I just give the once over with the spray paint all over the entirety of the miniatures. Now what priming does is actually gives a good surface for your acrylic paints to adhere to during the painting process. Unfortunately, if you were to paint your miniatures with acrylic on the bare plastic, there's not enough surface tension to keep your acrylic paints on the miniature, so the slightest bit of friction will actually rub the paint off, and it'll ruin the finished product on your miniatures as well. So that's where primers come in because it prevents that from happening. The second thing that primers also do is it actually has a huge impact on the vibrancy of the colors that you put on your miniatures. Traditionally speaking, the more vibrant color that you want to have, you want to go the lighter primer, and for a more darker color tone, you want to go the darker primer. And since we'll be using an oil wash, which will mute down the vibrancy of our colors in these miniatures, I decided to go with a white primer. Now once you're done with that, the first thing you do, of course, is putting base coats down on the miniatures. For a majority of the crew members, I painted those guys up in Apple Barrel's Flesh. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 50 cents. Just put two thin coats of flesh on all the exposed hands and faces that these miniatures have. As for the Death Cult Fighter in the middle there, I decided to pick out her colors in the two thin layers of Holly Branch, which is made by Apple Barrel Paint. It's a beautiful dark green color. Get this at your local Walmart for about 50 cents. Now as for the guy armed with a rotary cannon, I decided to paint him up in a darker skin tone with Burnt Umber by Apple Barrel Paint. You can get this at your local Walmart for 50 cents. As for the canine that's located on the left hand side for the dog, I painted up his fur in two thin layers of pavement paint, which you can also get at Walmart for 50 cents. And once we're done with our priming and our base coating, next thing we need to do now is to start doing some dry brushes. Now when it comes to the dry brushing for the flesh characters, I use Delta Serum Coats Peaches and Cream. It's a nice lighter skin tone color. I get this in my local Hobby Lobby for about 65 cents. I just do the once over with the dry brushing. As for the Death Cult Fight in the middle, I use Lime Sherbet by Apple Barrel Paint, which costs 50 cents. I just do a nice little dry brushing on all the parts that I painted in Holly. I use Territorial Beige or Apple Barrel Paint for the Rotary Gunner. Just put a dry brushing on his skin. And finally, for the little Doberman creature on the left hand side, I use Folk Arts Pale Gray, which costs 75 cents at my local Walmart as well. Now dry brushing is a very nice technique to use in order to create depth on your miniature, and by doing that, what happens is when you dry brush your miniature, the pigments of the individual paint actually adhere to the raised surfaces of the miniature while leaving that darker color in the base coats and the recesses of the miniature as well. This creates the illusion of depth in your miniature and also helps to highlight your miniature as well. And now that we're done with that, what we're actually going to do is we're going to actually break down this kill team into smaller sections and start working on their uniforms. So the first half of the kill team we're going to work on is the first officer armed with a shotgun, as well as the guy armed with a rotary cannon, as well as the three normal fighters in the background. And the reason why is because all these guys have a very specific color uniform. For the uniform, we're going to paint that in two thin layers of Skyline by Folk Art. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 75 cents. We're going to paint the giant greatcoats these guys are wearing on all their torsos, as well as on the hat of the rotary gunner as well. We're going to put that on two thin layers to create that nice bluish gray uniform color that we see on the box art for the Elucidian Starstriders. From there, we start working on things like the weapon casings, the boots, as well as the trousers. For the trousers, we picked out 2 thin layers of Pewter Gray by Apple Barrel Paint. You can get this stuff at your local Walmart for about 50 cents. As for the weapon casing, as well as the boots these guys are wearing, we're painting that in 2 thin layers of pigment paint as well to create that illusion of leather goods for those guys as well. And once we actually get done putting on those coats for the leather goods as well as for the trousers, next we need to work on are some of the finer details on their uniforms. Now, for a lot of these characters, they have cuffs as well as rolled up sleeves on their characters' uniforms. So for those cuffs that we see, we're gonna pick those on 2 thin layers of Mermaid Blue by Delta Serum Coat. You can get this at your local Hobby Lobby for about 65 cents. It's a nice turquoise blue that kind of contrasts nicely with the skyline that we put on the uniforms. And then we're gonna move on to the K9. As for the K9, he is also wearing body armor along his back and chest, so to make him match up for the rest of the crew members, we also base coated his armor panels in 2 layers of Skyline. You can get this made by Folk Art. You can get this at your local Walmart as well. Now, the next color we're going to work on are the leather goods these guys are wearing. These crews of the Elucidian Starstriders actually have a lot of leather harnesses overgoing their coats, as well as slings on their last guns. For those colors, I picked those on 2 thin layers of Burnt Umber, which is a nice, rich, dark blue or brown that you get at your local Walmart for about 50 cents. As for the Rotary Cannon Operator, as well as for the K9, we picked out those leather goods in Territorial Beige, so that way it contrasts nicely with the darker skin tones that we use for their uniforms as well. And once we apply those leather goods, the next we do now is a dry brush. Now for the dry brushing on this one, we're going to use Pale Gray by Folk Art, and we're going to apply this dry brush all over the uniforms as well as the weapon casings and the leather goods that we just got done painting earlier. That's one simple dry coat, just going to bring out those highlights by creating that illusion of depth. Now you might be thinking, Commander Cheapskate, why did you use one single color to do this? And the reason why is because I was feeling lazy and I didn't want to use other colors to do this. So I just used Pale Gray and the result came out excellent anyways. Now this next part, I will not lie, this is the most difficult portion of the entire paint job for the entirety of the Elucidian Starstriders, and that is the piping on their overcoats. Now unfortunately for us, there's this beautiful piping design for each one of the crew members of the Elucidian Starstrider, so because of that, what you want to do is pick those out in 2 thin layers of King's Gold. Now the reason why I say it's super frustrating is because it's just a small little rim of color that you're applying for the edges of the uniform, as well as a little scroll work with like different animal emblems on the uniforms themselves. It is quite frustrating because you really don't want to make a mistake here and ruin the base coating and the dry brushing that you did earlier, but if you do make a mistake, all you gotta do is neaten up with some Folk Art's Skyline if you do make a mistake on that one. So just take your time, be kind and patient with yourself as you pick out all the piping on the uniforms, and with that step done, we can now work on the character miniatures. So now that we're done with most of the crew members, let's go on and talk about the individual characters. Now for this one, I did this for the surgeon as well as for the captain, the rogue captain that's here. What I did is I picked out any details that were going to be in white, and I did that in 2 thin layers of Pale Gray by Folk Art. And the reason why I did that is because it's a very bright gray, which is almost white. So at the same time, it makes it a little bit easier to paint because white is one of those colors that is notoriously difficult to do. I like using Pale Gray to do my whites because it's very opaque, which means it'll cover up any mistakes that we might have. So I put this on the great coat for the surgeon on the left-hand side, as well as for the skirt of the Rogue Trader, as well as the sleeves on the right hand side as well. And the next major detail we're going to work on real quick are some of the sashes of some of these fighters, as well as the skirt of the Rogue Trader, as well as the Mechanicus guy there on the right hand side. Now for the sashes, as well as the skirt of the Rogue Trader, I picked out 2 thin layers of Anita's Acrylic True Red. You can get this stuff at your local Hobby Lobby for about 65 cents. It's a beautiful vibrant red that contrasts nicely with the greens and blues of the crew members and the Death Cult member, and it also has a very striking comparison to the rest of the color scheme used by that Rogue Trader as well. Now as for the little Electro guy there on the right hand side, for his overcoat, we picked out in 2 thin layers of Deco Arts Americana Magenta. You get this at your local Walmart for about 65 cents. I just put 2 thin coats directly on his overcoat to get a good rich magenta base coat for his uniform. Now the next detail we're going to work on for the character miniatures are all their leather goods, things like their boots as well as their gloves, and for that we're going to pick that on 2 thin layers of pigment paint. So for the little Electro guy there on the left hand side, I picked out his long gloves as well as his boots for that, as well as for the chest rig he's also wearing. For the doctor there in the center, I picked that out for her boots, as well as for the boots for the Rogue Trader there on the center. And then for the Death Cult member, this actually makes up most of her color scheme. You use it on her sleeves of her gloves, as well as her thigh-high boots, as well as the, I guess you would say, corset that she's wearing, as well as the helmet that she's also wearing as well. And once we put those 2 thin layers of pigment paint on, the next we gotta do is a dry brush. So starting with the little Electro dude there you see right there, I decided to dry brush his uniform in a thin layer of Lilac Mist by Apple Barrel Paint. It's a beautiful lavender type purple color you can get at your local Walmart for about 50 cents. I just apply this as a highlighting directly onto the magenta great coat that she's wearing. And as for all the pigment paint that we used earlier, we're just going to put a thin dry brushing of pale gray by Folk Art directly on the leather goods as well to bring out those individual details we could not see before. So the gloves and the boots of the Letro person, same thing the boots of the surgeon, the boots, corset, as well as boots, gloves, and mask of the Death Cult member, as well as the boots of the Rogue Trader. And once again, another detail we'll be focusing now is on the piping of the uniforms these characters are wearing as well. Like I said before, the Elucidian Starstriders have these very vibrant, very Baroque looking piping on their uniforms, which is actually quite frustrating to paint, so do take your time with this. For all those yellow portions that we did, we're going to put this on 2 thin layers of King's Gold, which is a beautiful yellow color that you get from your local Walmart for about 50 cents. So we're going to use this for the sash of the Death Cult member, as well as the piping along the surgeon, as well as the Electro person on there on the left-hand side, and same thing with the Rogue Trader. And once we get done with that yellow, we can start working on some of the finer details on these miniatures. So for 2 of the characters, which is the Death Cult member as well as the Doctor, they're actually standing on little Nurgling creatures from the Rogue Trader box set when they went up against the different little Nurgling demons that they're facing out in space. So to create those little Nurgling demons, what I decided to do is pick down 2 thin layers of Taupe Gray by Anita's Acrylic. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 65 cents. So for like the little creature there that the Doctor's standing on, as well as the head of the Death Cult member, just picked out those details in 2 thin layers of that color. And the next color we're going to focus on are all the leather goods for these characters as well. I'm going to use burnt umber in order to pick out those details. For example, we're going for the leather harnesses that the Doctor is wearing, as well as the chest armor, the scabbard, as well as the holster for the Rogue Trader. And we're doing exactly the same thing for all the leather goods for the Electro guy there in the center, as well as the character on the right-hand side from the Death Cult. And speaking of the Death Cult member, we're going to spend some time here to actually add some more further details for this miniature. For example, the hair that she has behind her helmet, we picked down 2 thin layers of Lilac Mist. We also picked out the hair of the little Nurgling thing that she has by its hair by picking down 2 thin layers of Bright Blue by Apple Barrel paint as well. Now as for the tongue that's coming out of the mouth of the creature, as well as for the handle of her sword, we picked those out in 2 thin layers of Bright Magenta by Apple Barrel paint. And the last thing we did, of course, was add a little highlighting of Lime Sherbet directly to the eye lenses of this fighter as well. Continuing on the detail work for the rest of the fighters, for the little Electro guy there, we put the Mermaid Blue directly onto some of the chest rigging that this character is wearing, so that way it's glowing with energy for that character. As for the Rogue Trader there on the right hand side, we picked up the feathers of her helmet in 2 thin layers of Crisp Apple. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 50 cents. And now that we're done with those, we got to move on to a very last dry brushing for our character miniatures. And for the Doctor, because she's standing on those little Nurgling things, we dry brush his flesh in a thin layer of Lime Sherbet, so that way it creates this kind of sickly, pale green looking thing, which is just perfect for Nurgle, all things considered. So now that we're done with most of the miniatures, next we do now start working on the metallic elements of these miniatures as well, and these guys have quite a bit of metallics on them, so let's talk about what colors we use. So for the armor, for most of it, we use Deco Art's Emperor's Gold, which is a beautiful, rich golden color that we use for most of the armor that you're seeing on these characters. Things like the helmets they're wearing, the masks they have on, the shoulder pads that they also have too, as well as some of the ridging of the armor for the little canine dog there on the left-hand side as well. Now when it came to their weapons, we decided to use Gunmetal Gray by Folk Art, which costs 75 cents at your local Walmart. We did this for the blades, the weapons, the barrels, the guns, the claws of the Doctor, for example, the buckles of all their leather goods. And then we also broke out the monotony of their colors by using Antique Copper by Anita's Acrylic, which costs 65 cents at your local Walmart, as well as Copper by Folk Art, which you can get for 75 cents at your local Walmart as well. And what we did is we broke up the monotony of that to kind of create some additional details. For example, if you look at the Rogue Trader, on her leather armor that she's wearing on her chest, I picked out some of those details in Aged Copper to add some details there as well. Same thing with the guns of the little Electro guy there in the center. I used that, for example, to paint the barrel of his gun with steel, but a lot of the like additional add-ins like the compensator, the grip, as well as the revolver of his pistol, the revolving cylinder, I picked those out in Deco Art, for example, as well as copper for some of the cabling that's running on these characters as well. In fact, if we took these same characters and rotated 160, you could talk about some of the cabling that we were talking about earlier. These guys have these beautiful like little power packs that they're wearing on their backs as well, and so they have a lot of cables running from that. I also use Folk Art's Copper to do that. Same thing with Antique Copper, as well as other gold and silver elements as well. So just find the details that you want to have those metallic elements picked out, and just paint them accordingly. And we also use the exact same colors as well for the members of the crew, as well. As you can see, we use primarily Deco Art's Emperor's Gold for most of the armor. So the chest plates, for example, the shoulder pads they're wearing as well. For the helmets, all we did is we left the helmets white from earlier when we did our priming, and then we just kind of gently and very carefully picked out the Baroque armor details in that same Emperor's Gold in that armor as well. It's beautifully Baroque armor. It's really, really well done. It looks amazing as well. At the same time, we also picked out their weapons using those gunmetal gray colors for the barrels, the weapons, magazines, etc. At the same time, we also use aged copper as well as folk arts copper to break up the monotony of those weapons. Things like the ammo belt, for example, that's hanging out the rotary cannon. And once again, if you look at the backs that these guys have as well, they have these really beautiful looking power packs as well as little emblems over the place. So we picked out all those metallic elements to bring out those details that we couldn't see earlier. And that's one of the things I really love about these Elucidian Starstriders. They actually are very beautifully sculpted with some really unique characteristics, and they look absolutely fantastic. My only regret is that we don't have more variety of different characters that we can build, like the rest of these crew members. It'd be kind of cool if we get some more crew members if you want to extend this kill team beyond its current size. So the metallic elements are over with. We're pretty much done with all the major work on these miniatures. Now we're just focusing on the fine details. So for example, if you look at the power packs these guys are wearing, I decided to paint that little screen on their power packs in 2 thin layers of mermaid blue. It contrasts nicely with the gold armor of their power packs, so it looks really awesome as well, and it's very eye-catching. Continuing on with some of the finer details of these crew members, for example, one of the crew members got this beautiful long braid that crosses her chest. I decided to pick out the cording of her braiding in 2 thin layers of Anita's acrylic. At the same time, we also have a guy with a shotgun. He's got 2 medals on his chest, so I pinned the ribbons in King's Gold as well as in Anita's acrylic as well, and then of course paint those little medals a silver color so that way it contrasts nicely against the rest of his uniform. Now, as for the finer details that we're seeing on these fighters, for example, we're using some of the khaki paints as well to kind of dry brush the paint the base that the Death Cult member is standing on as well. At the same time, we're using mermaid blue to pick out some of the diodes and dials that we're seeing, things like the energy coils on the electro guy, the screens of his little handheld device, as well as some of the power cells on his weapon. We're also using lime shimmer to do exactly the same thing for the doctor, picking out a lot of the vials that she's actually wearing on her wrists, as also in her briefcase that she's also carrying. And once again, using those same colors on the power packs these characters are wearing, using that mermaid blue to pick out that detail to make it look like these things are glowing as well. And that's exactly what we did for all the paints for these fine details. And now that we're done with that, next we need to start working on is on the bases. So like I said before at the beginning of this video, I know a lot of players are using these guys for Warhammer 40,000 and Warhammer 40,000 Kill Team. However, I'll be using these guys in Necromunda. So to make these guys match the rest of my Necromunda miniatures, I painted their bases in 2 thin layers of pewter gray. Now if you'll do notice, there is some white undercoat peeking through the pewter gray that I applied on these bases, but that's not a problem at all because we're going to dry brush these bases in pale gray anyways. And that's exactly what we did in this photo. As you can see, I just dusted the dry brushing with some pale gray directly on the texturing to create some depth, leaving that pale gray in the darker recesses while the lighter gray as it rose up to the surface to make this kind of burnt out, ashy kind of texture that they're standing on, which is perfect for your games of Necromunda. So now that we're done with the bases, the next we need to deploy now is an oil wash. So like always, we're going to do a quick oil wash on these miniatures, and we like to use Minwax polyacrylic in Mission Oak color. The reason why, because it only costs $6.99 at my local Walmart, while Army Painter Strong Tone costs 5 times as much at $35.99. And it does exactly the same thing as Army Painter does as well. Now the oil washing does a couple of things. The first thing that it does is that it seeps directly into the recesses of the miniatures to the details we couldn't see before. So things like the spaces between the fingers, for example, the folding of their fabric, the gaps between armor panels, the Baroque details on the armor panels as well as the individual granulates of sand on their bases. We let this oil wash recess directly into those recesses to bring a lot of those details out. Another thing that the oil wash also does too is it smooths out the transitions between our base coats and our dry brushing. So as you can see here, the chalky pastel finish that we saw earlier is no longer in existence because those colors have now been blended together seamlessly by the oil wash. And the very last thing the oil wash also does too is it darkens down the vibrancy of our colors. And that's the reason why we chose the colors that we did when we painted these miniatures, because we knew right off the bat that the colors would be significantly muted by that oil wash, but at the same time these guys still look vibrant and they also look beautiful as well. And if you notice, I want to draw attention to both the Surgeon as well as the Rogue Trader. If you notice, they have white in their uniforms, but because we use pale gray to use the white, and when we add the oil wash on it, it has a much more subdued effect on their uniforms. Now this stuff does have polyurethane in it, so you will need to wait 24 hours for this stuff to dry and cure, and once you are done, ready for a matte varnish. Now this next step is completely optional, but I don't like the high gloss sheen that's on my miniatures from the polyurethane and the Minwax poly shade, so because I buy a can of Krylon matte spray from my local Walmart, it costs $5.99, just do the once over to mute down the sheen of these miniatures and give it a matte finish. You could of course skip this step if you don't like that matte finish. And the very last step we're going to work on these miniatures is to paint the rim of the bases, and because these guys will be going for part of my Necromunda collection, I'm going to paint them in Skyline, which is the same bluish gray color I use for all the rims of all the Necromunda miniatures in the studio's collection. I think it looks nice and it does an excellent job of merging these guys into that setting. So now that we're done with that, that pretty much finishes up our miniatures. So here's the end result of all of our hard work. As you can see, we have a beautiful tabletop standard by using some really cheap materials that cost us less than $30 in order to paint up these miniatures as well. So that being said, we're going to now talk about exactly what materials you need to buy from Army Painter as well as Citadel if you want to paint your miniatures exactly the same way we did, but using their products instead. Alright, so these are the materials that you need to buy from Citadel as well as Army Painter if you want to paint your miniatures the same way we did, but using their products instead. First of all, you need to buy Averland Sunset, Decala Lilac, Teclis Blue, Caliban Green, Screamer Pink, Cyberite Green, Cadian Flesh Tone, Baylor Brown, Hellion Green, Slaanesh Gray, Eshin Gray, Pink Horror, Flayed One Flesh, Baharoth Blue, Mephiston Red, Rakarth Flesh, Rust Gray, as well as Ulthuan Gray, and each one of those costs $4.55, which makes them anywhere between 9 to 7 times more expensive than the craft paint that we actually use. And plus we get 2 fluid ounces of craft paint as opposed to whatever small metric amount you get from the Games Workshop. At the same time, you'll also need to buy the colors Brass Scorpion, Lead Belcher, Screaming Bell, Retributor Armor, as well as Wildwood, as well as Astrogranite, and all those cost $7.80 a pot, which makes them anywhere between 9 to 10 times more expensive than the stuff that we like to use. At the same time, you also need to buy Corax White Spray for $17, which makes it 5 times more expensive than my Rust-Oleum Flat White Primer, as well as a can of Mutatorium Varnish for $19.50, which basically makes it about 3 times more expensive than my Chronolon Matte Finish Spray that I use. And at the same time, you also need to buy a can of Army Painter Strong Tone for $32, which is about 5 times more than my Midwax polisher that I use for my oil wash. So assuming that you're purchasing everything from Citadel Army Painter for the very first time, we're talking about a grand total investment of $197.20 to purchase all those materials to paint up your Elucidian Starstriders. Now when you compare that to the Cheapskate method, which only costs us $29.97, we end up saving a grand total of $167.23. And the savings alone speak for themselves. So there you guys have it. This is how you guys can quickly and more importantly cheaply paint up a squad of Elucidian Starstriders for your games of Warhammer 40,000 Kill Team. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is invaluable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as blogger.com for all these greatest hobby news related to this channel. That's good for this week, guys. We'll catch you guys next one. Peace out and stay classy.